as you know, as a freelance bass player in this town, you'll spend a fair amount of your calendar on gigs that aren't necessarily things you're going to be inviting your friends to. A private event, a hotel lounge, whatever, stuff that's paying work and you're happy to do it, and it's not bad. Yeah. But when people are like, oh, let me know when you're playing, it's like, well, I'm playing tonight, but it's not what you want.
Yeah,
so
and it's not what I want either. I'm just doing it.
Exactly. I mean, there's great players. It's a fun time, but this, you don't want this.
Welcome to episode 132 of the Bass Shed Podcast. My name is Ryan Roberts. What's up, everybody? Thanks for listening to the Bass Shed Podcast. To all the new listeners, please make sure to hit the subscribe button and subscribe to the Bass Shed Podcast wherever you enjoy listening to podcasts. Folks, if we're connected on Instagram, you might have gotten a personal message from me. On October 26th, the Bass Shed is presenting a Latin music workshop with bassist and producer Oscar Cartaya. Oscar will speak about bass player-specific topics of sound production, feel, locking in with the clave, but he'll also speak about Latin music in a much broader sense. This workshop is designed for all musicians of any age level and skill level. The Latin Music Workshop will be live streamed and published on the BassShedAcademy.org for later viewing. So if you can't make it but you are interested, please register. Let us know that you want to attend, and you'll be able to check it out at your convenience. Proceeds from the Latin Music Workshop support Global Arts Corporation. The Global Arts Corporation is a nonprofit organization that builds sustainable relationships through music and supports music education for lower income communities. I have a link to the workshop in the show notes, so sign up for the Latin Music Workshop and take your playing to the next level and make a difference in the lives of young musicians. All right, so there are some folks I'd really like to bring special attention to on this episode. Now, before I get into talking about these folks, I want to apologize upfront to them if I butcher your name in any way. I'm sincerely sorry. So, with that being said, right, with that as the preface, here we go. Here's some special folks. In no particular order, I want to give a special shout out to Lawrence Haber. Check him out, lawrencehabermusic.com. You can also check him out on Instagram with the same handle at Lawrence Haber Music. That is Lawrence, Haber Music. To all the folks that run Mike's Bass Corner on Instagram. Now, I don't know if that's just one guy, if like just Mike is handling all that. They put out a lot of content, so I'm assuming there's kind of a team going on over there. If it's just Mike, or if it's the team, thank you to everyone at Mike's Bass Corner. If you're on Instagram, go on over to Mike's Bass Corner, and if you don't already subscribe to that platform and to their channel, check that out, Mike's Bass Corner. All right, and last but definitely not least, Claudia Arroyev. And Claudia, like, your last name was the one I was the most concerned about. I'm sorry. I suck. I'm sorry. Follow Claudia on Instagram at CLAU_ARROYAVE. Check that out. I will have links to all these folks in the show notes below and all the links I mentioned. Each of these folks was very generous to support the Bass Shed and helped spread the word about the Latin Bass Workshop on October 26th. I will have links, again, to each of them in the show notes, and definitely go support these folks. They supported the Bass Shed. The Bass Shed is trying to support the bass community, and they supported what we're doing here. So Lawrence, Mike, and the folks over at Mike's Bass Corner, Claudia, thank you all so much for your generosity, and thank you for supporting the workshop. LemurMusic.com, everything you need for the double bass. Visit LemurMusic.com and shop their inventory of basses, bows, rosin, sheet music, and accessories. If you are in the Southern California area, set up an appointment, stop in, and experience the shop for yourself. LemurMusic.com. Use the promo code TheBassShed, all one word, for 10% off.
Hi, this is Jerry Jamont. I want to tell you about my upcoming book of bass transcriptions, JJ's Jukebox Volume 1. This is a collection of over 15 of my bass lines in standard notation and tablature. They are accurately done here by Ryan Roberts of the Bass Shed Academy. Each transcription is accompanied by a video where I talk about what was happening during the recording session how I got involved, and how I approach each song. Stop by the bassshedacademy.org to learn more about my book of transcriptions, JJ's Jukebox Volume 1, and purchase a signed copy of my memoirs, Make It Happen.
On the episode is Gary Wicks. For listeners that have checked out the early episodes, you might remember that Gary Wicks was my guest on episode number 5 of the Bass Shed podcast. For new listeners, Gary is an in-demand bassist, composer, and educator and clinician in Los Angeles whose versatility has enabled him to perform with world-class artists in many different venues all around the world. Originally from Albany, New York, Gary is a second-generation bassist and has been a part of the vibrant music scenes of Los Angeles, London, Albany, and Boston, where he earned his bachelor's in double bass performance from the New England Conservatory of Music. He also holds a master's in jazz studies from the University of Southern California, which he earned while touring internationally with the Grammy Award-winning vocal group Manhattan Transfer. Gary has performed and recorded at many prestigious recording studios, music festivals, concert halls, and clubs around the world for such varied artists as Quincy Jones, Matthew Morrison, Manhattan Transfer, Stevie Wonder, Take Nicks, John Williams, Monica Mancini, Bob Newhart, Joan Rivers, Don Rickles, Regis Philbin. Like, the list goes on and on. Gary's a straight up veteran. Gary is a straight up veteran. With all the guests that have been on the show, I always let them know that they can come back on the show anytime they have news to share or whenever they want to. Gary did absolutely that. Gary did that. Gary told me about a new project he has titled Is That You? And they have a new EP out titled Split 5 Ways. Gary and I spent quite a bit of time on this episode discussing the new EP. And it's a really cool, it's not what I expected to hear, and I always love that. I always love when I receive things to check out from guests who are going to be on the show, and it's not exactly what I kind of already had in mind. And that's this EP, Split 5 Ways. It was definitely one of those, and now you can hear about it from the man himself, actually. Here's my talk with Gary Wicks. Right on, man. How you doing?
Hey, man. Good.
Dude, great to have you back on, man. I had to look it up. Like, you were I remember you were one of the first, episode 5.
Yeah.
All the way back.
Way back in the day.
Man, I remember that. Yeah, we recorded it at your place.
That's right. And It was funny when I listened back. I thought like perhaps I had just drinking an entire pot of coffee and helium because I had had a cold like a week or so earlier, and I had lost my voice a little bit, and it was just coming back.
Yeah.
And I was like super excited. So everything I said was like lightning fast.
That's
Like,
hilarious.
Funny.
Man, you sent me a link to your new EP, which is killing. Like, I didn't respond off of the episode so that I could respond on the episode.
Right on.
Super killing. Not I really didn't know what to expect actually going into it. I knew you have a writing partner for it, but I didn't really know fully what I was getting myself into. My first like initial thoughts, like, so when people send me records, like I'm just listening and just like writing down ideas as I'm hearing it or feeling it. So right away, like, I get a 70s cinematic feel. Like, there's a noir quality.
100%.
To all of it. So it's the EP. Well, let's rewind. The group is called Is That You?
Yes.
The EP is called Split 5 Ways. It's a 4-track EP. And I knew it was you and your writing partner, production partner on the project. So again, I didn't know really what to expect as far as instrumentation went. You know, maybe it's like, okay, well, I know Gary plays and Gary plays great, so there's going to be definitely great bass lines on it, but maybe a guy with an acoustic guitar and some piano or something. But it is a fully produced, thick sound, a lot of layers that all work really well together. Like, it's a nice, delicate balance in the production.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's so it's actually 3 of us. It started my friend Tim Ziesmer, who's a brilliant guitar player, great composer, and keyboardist Dan Berkson. And the 3 of us met at NEC years ago.
Okay.
And Tim has sort of helped kind of guide me with my venture into production music and library album placements and stuff. And in that process, we started spitballing like, hey, we should collaborate on something.
Yeah.
And he had this vision of like wanting to do something that sounded very like Ocean's 11, late 60s, early 70s, like spy movie, heist movie.
Yeah, exactly. Those are part of my notes. It's either like spy or like cop chase from the 70s.
Yep.
The band Galactic came to mind. Like there's kind of an acid jazz quality to it. Definitely on the tracks where you play upright.
Yeah. And so Tim said to me, record some groovy bass lines, some funky bass lines that in that mindset. So I listened to a bunch of stuff to get some ideas and get my head in that direction. And then it was funny. He's like, hey man, where are the bass lines? I'm like, I'll get to it. Yeah, and I was about to head off to a gig and he texted me. He's like, send me something. I said, all right, I've got about 20 minutes. And I quickly Logic, threw this mic in front of my bass and just threw down a bunch of like stream of consciousness, groovy ideas. And of that, 2 of the songs on the EP, the single Butch and Sundance and the last song Split 5 Ways came out of that process where I just started playing something in that vibe, sent it off to him. He picked the ones that he liked the most and started writing to it. And it was kind of born in that mindset of like, you start it, then throw it over to me. And then, and I think, much like you said, you didn't know what you were getting into. It was similar. It was sort of like, let's try something. And it kind of grew from there. And as it was growing and starting to take shape and was like, wait, this is really pretty good. At the time, Tim was in Portland and he started, hiring some players up there to fill out the parts, going from what you might do in production music, mocking up some parts with virtual instruments and then saying, all right, this is a cool idea, but it needs real players if we really want to put this up. It kind of became that thing. And Tim had some stuff already written. The second track, Cat's Eye Glasses, which is sort of an homage to Carol Kay and the Beach Boys and that vibe. Is why I used this pick.
The Carol Kay pick. Nice.
Pick.
Did you get that from Carol?
I actually did. I've held onto this thing for years. It's almost done. I realized I can order some from her website, which I need to go do. But when I first moved to LA, I had a few lessons with her and I got she handed me, she's like, you need to use this. Like,
what? Now coming from New England Conservatory, what I don't want to say what was the benefit of studying with Carol, but what did you gain from her lineage and legendary status that wasn't found in like a normal academic thing?
Yeah. Well, it was also a really brief period in time, as opposed to when you're in school for 4 years and you have weekly lessons with your teacher. It was like a 1 week or 2 week intensive. I can't quite recall now. When I first moved to LA, there was a summer music program called the Henry Mancini Institute.
Oh, yeah.
And that was sort of how I moved out here. I auditioned, got accepted, and moved to LA and did the summer program. And she was one of the faculty members there. Okay. So I had a handful of like back-to-back lessons where there wasn't like your traditional scenario of like a week off in between each lesson to work on stuff. It was pretty back-to-back. But that said, really what I gleaned the most from her was this is how she does it.
Yeah.
And that's
just her process.
Yeah. And I remember at one point, I'd never really used a pick before then. Right. And I was playing with fingers on my old P bass, but I had round wounds on it. And she was like, yeah, that's all well and good, but you're wrong. Yeah. You need flat wounds and you need this pick and you need to turn your treble all the way off. And I was like, okay. And I remember saying something to the effect of, I don't know that that's really my sound, but I appreciate it. And she was like, well, and then she started listing producers and artists that were like, well, they like the sound, so it works. Right. And I was like, fair enough.
Yeah. All right.
And so really what I gleaned most from her, we talked about a bunch of different stuff in those lessons, but really what I gleaned most from her was that she had a specific thing that was her sound, her vibe, and it works. And like it or not, it's fact, right?
Yeah.
And so I was just like, cool, I'm just going to immerse myself in that and see what I can take away,
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
How much, so to go back to the EP, there's the 2 tracks that are upright and 2 tracks that are electric.
Yeah.
I think it's track 4 on the EP, which is Letters of Transit. That just sounds like a P bass. Is that the track before that, track 3? That tone has some grit to it. Like it could be a P, but it's not necessarily.
Both of those are this guy. Let me show you. Both of them are this.
Okay.
This 69 P bass.
Sick.
Yeah, I mean, the cat's eye glasses, there's also like a guitar doubling the bass line, so you have a different quality. But and I was doing my best of Carol Kay impersonation with the flat wounds, the treble rolled off, and I was running it through my Nordstrand preamp into my old Ampeg B15.
Okay,
and that was it.
Solid signal chain.
Solid signal chain, nothing too fancy. And so
that
they
track,
were both the bass. Yeah.
That track definitely does have kind of a playful Beach Boys quality. The track that it reminded me of the most was Eleanor by the Turtles.
Oh, I don't know if I know that one.
I was listening to the EP and then I just started kind of singing in the back of my head. All I could remember was the line, "I think you're swell and you really do me well." And so I just Googled that, and then that's how I remembered it was the.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna have to go listen to it after this. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's your guys' tune isn't as dark as that tune by the Turtles, but there was a quality there that reminded me of it. So it definitely kind of put it again in like that late '60s Beach Boys atmosphere.
Yeah,
downscape wise.
I mean, really the whole project at this point, and we'll see where it goes because we're working on new material now. Was definitely that Ocean's 11, late 60s, early 70s cinema, like Lalo Schifrin meets Herbie,
right?
That kind of sort of, not, I don't want to say dated, but that era of sound choices.
It's like a nod to those things, like the use of the flute, the use of the strings, like a lot of things that era did in funk music.
And a lot of that was Tim and I talking about it, and Tim just running with it and knowing, because he's such a great composer. Like, we're talking about one. I forget which song we're talking about, and I said, I'm hearing like 70s strings.
Yeah,
like, exactly. And then next thing I know, he's got strings on the track. I'm like, okay. He's one of those guys. Like, here's the idea, and then boom, it's done. I'm like, oh,
boom, yeah. Killer.
And I was generally pleased. I did all the bass tracks from home with my setup at home, so I was really pleased with how it all came out. And the first track, especially, the bass is really up front, and that was an intentional decision. It wasn't bass ego. It was more like music.
Right.
We want this to be like bass forward, this song. And again, referencing back to like the Ocean's 11 stuff, if you listen to that soundtrack, there's a lot of that where the upright bass is real present, and that's really kind of driving.
I can't really recall that soundtrack so much. Do you know who composed that soundtrack?
I do, and I forgot. I bet you I can find it real quick. I love when you look it up and it says various artists. David Holmes. David Holmes is the main guy.
Okay.
But yeah. Yeah. So so that was sort of like, it was really nice. As you know, as a freelance bass player in this town, you'll spend a fair amount of your calendar on gigs that aren't necessarily things you're going to be inviting your friends to. A private event, a hotel lounge, whatever, stuff that's paying work and you're happy to do it, and it's not bad. But when people are like, oh, let me know when you're playing, it's like, well, I'm playing tonight, but it's not what you want.
Yeah,
so,
and it's not what I want either. I'm just doing it.
Exactly. I mean, there's great players. It's a fun time, but this, you don't want this. So it was nice to be to start on a creative project, to form a new group with kind of like-minded ideas,
Yeah.
like I said, we all met at NEC, so we spent a lot of intensive time in practice rooms together. So we're pulling from a lot of the same influences from when we were in those formative years of our brains
Sure.
still developing musically. I remember very vividly at NEC, this is like the early 90s, the internet was just barely starting, and they had a great music library with tons of stuff you could listen to, and they had these listening rooms with like multimedia, great stereo, TV, all that. And I remember the group of us went in there and took out a Keith Jarrett trio concert video.
Great.
And I just remember that very vividly, that experience of a bunch of young music nerds that have just met only a few weeks ago, and we're in all these classes together, playing in ensembles and grabbing practice rooms and trying out ideas, and then sitting in a room together, listening to these masters and all having this experience together. And I think that kind of stuff, those kind of experiences really kind of forms bonds and forms musical mindsets that when we're like to this, we're texting each other all the time, like, and half the time we're sending each other links to an album that we listened to together like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And like, this still holds up,
Right.
things like that. And some of the time it's helpful to kind of like draw ideas like, oh yeah, let's do something like this on another tune, and throwing ideas back and forth. So it's really refreshing amongst all the work gigs to have a creative project, a creative outlet where it's really like everyone's ideas are respected and welcomed, and like, oh cool, what are you gonna, and to the point where it's like, hey, put something on this, not like, I want you to play this thing,
right
here, add something to this and send it back, let's see what we got. And knowing that there's a trust and a freedom to try ideas. And then sometimes it's like, hey, I want you to play this specific thing because I have this idea. Great. But it's a level of trust and creativity. And it's nice to have, at the end of the day, to have a product from that,
for sure,
like this EP, where you can sit back and listen to the finished thing and say, yeah, cool, this worked. Let's keep going.
Yeah. And, in the process of getting into, I don't know if it's a genre, but getting into that soundscape, getting into those, musical ideas, you mentioned you pulled from the Ocean's 11 soundtrack. Did you get exposed to a lot of new music in investigating those sounds and that approach and those feels?
Yes. Some of it new music, some of it music I was aware of but never really spent time listening to. And definitely listened to some soundtracks from that era that we were using as inspiration that I had never listened to. And how have I never listened to this? This is amazing. And checking out some of these classic composers whose names are on the tip of your tongue, but I was like, yeah, have I ever really consciously listened to a soundtrack by this composer? I don't know.
Right.
But let me dig in. So yeah, there was a bit of that, some of which for me was influencing what I might play, and some of it was more influencing the vibe that we're trying to create, to keep that in mind as I'm coming up with my parts and ideas,
Right.
To kind of stay on track.
Yeah. I know you've been getting into some other production work in general, and I know you've been doing string arrangements and record producing. Let's talk about those projects, and let's talk about the album production first, and then we'll come into the strings, the string arrangements you've been writing, and some things for film. I definitely want to talk about the film stuff because of its relationship, like those sounds, to the cinematic quality of this EP and how those tie in together. But what kind of albums have you been working on in the production chair?
This current album with the band Is That You, that's like an artist release, and definitely has a cinematic quality. We hope to place it in some content.
I feel like it's got potential for placements and to be, in a library for sure.
Yeah, that's the hope, to kind of, for that to not necessarily be to circumvent the library angle and just put out some artist content. And if we can get some synchronization, music placements, some sync placements in something, I think it's ideal for that. I've been writing some albums for libraries, some different music libraries, where during the pandemic, when everything shut down and gigs went away, I was scratching my head saying, what am I going to do? This is realizing that I can't solely rely on gigs because look, they all went away.
Right.
But also I need to be creating still. I can't not be playing. So as much as I said before, like some gigs are just work, they're still a creative outlet. You know, when you're playing standards in a hotel lobby gig and you get to take some solos and explore some songs, it's still a creative outlet. And so to have that completely taken away felt like, I don't know, just kind of dead inside, to have no outlet. And so I, took the time off to kind of finally step into that arena that I was always interested in, to buy some of the gear necessary, like microphones, interfaces, all that stuff to be able to record. And so I took some production music online classes and started learning some things. And through the process of just doing, like anything, the more you do something, the more you learn. That's not necessarily taught.
That's right.
And ironically, my friend Tim, for Is That You, he was one of the first people that hit me up to record bass for him, because I said, hey, I'm getting into this. He said, let me hear what you're doing. I sent him a couple things I recorded. He said, yeah, sounds good. I want you to play in these tracks. And he kind of guided me and taught me some of the basics that I wasn't aware of. And from that, just kind of, it was sort of like the gateway drug of writing music, and then mixing it, producing it, doing the whole thing. And then it started out as what I thought would be 5 or 6 songs, turned into 10, turned into 12. And then that split into 2 separate 6-track EPs for libraries and went to 2 different libraries.
Okay.
And it was just a great experience. And I was like, wow, I can actually do this. I get it. The flow, and writing for that is a little different than writing for something you're going to do with an artist or your own music that you want to put out in the world. Not to say I'm not proud of it and that I wouldn't want people to listen to it, but it's written with a different agenda in mind.
Right. Performance isn't part of the intention of the music necessarily. You're not thinking about how this is going to be performed, or if it's, improvised music, like writing changes that are cool to solo over and like an interesting form. You're approaching it from a different way.
Yeah, and the whole production music mentality of like every 4 bars something has to shift.
Sure.
Be it an instrument comes in, an instrument drops out, a harmonic shift, something, and fitting the mood and the expectation of that particular thing. And one of the things I had to learn in that process, coming from having studied jazz and classical music, where the goal was to be able to play and create long phrases and play more intricate harmonic information, was to kind of reverse that and dial that back and say, okay, a 4-bar phrase, another 4-bar phrase.
Right.
Don't overplay, don't overthink it. And at first I found I was doing too much, and I had to start muting things and deleting things, because it was like, okay, this wrong for this.
Right.
So it was a learning curve. But it's picked up steam, and I'm starting to do more. I'm just about done with another library album that's going in yet a different library. And there's been some collaborations, and so it's an interesting process. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of, it's been also a fun creative outlet, like I was saying before, because even though this is not something that's an artist content, I still want to write good music. I want to play something I enjoy. And I think what's helping my stuff is that my foundation is as a bass player. So the bottom of the track sounds pretty solid. My upright is really nice, and it gives me a nice foundation to build the rest of it on. Where I am not a banjo player, but I have I have an old tenor banjo.
Okay, well, my next podcast, the Banjo Shed, I might not have you on. I might not have you be on the Banjo Shed.
Yeah, exactly. But it I've got a good bass sound, so I can get by with sort of a very sparse banjo riff that I come up with that fits the vibe. You hear the banjo sound, but I'm not Bela Fleck. I'm not shedding any amazing banjo lines, but that's okay. But yeah, so that's been it's been a fun experience, and I enjoy that, like every day getting into the DAW and writing a track, and every time I do it, I learn something new, which is something I'm a big fan of. I just feel like I don't want to ever stop learning.
Is there a part of the process that's more interesting than others? Like, I know some people really gravitate towards engineering, or just writing this song, or just mixing. Is there a portion that's like, yeah, this is really my thing. This is what, if I could do just this part, all the time, that would be killing.
Right. It's funny you say that because I've had a similar conversation with other friends doing this stuff, and some will say like, "Oh God, I just hate mixing. I don't want anything to do with that. I just want to record and hand it off." And honestly, I like the entire process because when I'm doing it in my mind, I'm sort of seeing a jigsaw puzzle, and I'm seeing where pieces fit. In my mind, I'm already mixing as I'm creating because as I'm coming up with a part, I'm thinking, this is going to be really cool when I pan this off to the right and, really EQ out a lot of the low end. So it's kind of this interesting soundscape over here. And when I'm playing this line, I'm like, yeah, this is going to be front and center. This is going to drive the track. So I'm thinking about that as I'm creating.
Sure.
And so I kind of like the whole process. And then once everything's recorded and cleaned up and all the tracks are ready for mixing, I actually really enjoy. I mean, there's a lot I don't know. I'm not going to pretend like I'm a proper.
I mean, it's exhausting, It's just like anything. Any one genre pursuit. If someone's really deep in Cuban music, like there's so much you have to know about call and response and blah 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 about that thing. Every world is like that. Every aspect of the industry is like that. You can't ever know it all.
Oh, absolutely.
I think everybody just learns enough to do their thing.
Yeah, and I think right now I've learned enough to be dangerous, and I hope I learn a little bit more so I can really be good with it. Because every time I work on something, I always bump up against some, speed bump that I'm like, oh wait, how do I deal with this thing? And then I'm on the Google, on the YouTube, like, how do I fix this problem? And inevitably I find an answer, which then leads me down a rabbit hole of like all this stuff I didn't know. Then I'm like, oh man, okay, next track I'm going to try doing that. Right. And I'm literally in the middle of that on this one track. I probably could have been done with it by now, but I'm trying to implement some things that I was learning on some instructional YouTube videos that
Is it some mixed things or some engineer things?
A little bit of both. Getting a better handle on gain staging all the tracks so the mixing goes a little smoother. The first few things I did when I listen back to them, I cringe because I'm like, oh, okay, I didn't know about this thing yet. I'm surprised this passed the test because I hear it. But I think for me, my strength is writing and playing, and that's kind of carried over some of what I was lacking in the engineering and recording mixing side of it. So I enjoy the whole process, and every time I learn something or I intentionally try to implement something that I hadn't done before.
Right.
That's fun.
Right. How is your experience with writing for library music different than like we spoke yesterday and you were talking about you might have some things coming up in the future where you're working on films. To what degree, are you a full composer? Does that also include like sound design? Do you have an influence in the style of music? Or are they just, would that project be like, we want something like this? What do you got? Almost where they're asking you kind of like a library approach to it, kind of writing on spec, or do you have some freedom? And how does your writing process change in relation to just library clips?
Yeah, I think each situation is its own scenario. And and also to be clear, I have very little experience yet writing to picture. That's a new foray. And the thing we were chatting yesterday, I brought up, it's very early stages, very loosey-goosey. I have very little info yet. So I'm curious to find out how much will be dictated to me and how much I will have some freedom. And I also have yet to find out how involved it's going to be. May only be for a few spots in the thing, or it might be a lot. So there's a lot of questions yet to be answered that will help clarify that. But as far as how it might contrast or compare to the library stuff, I think I'm going to try to keep a lot of the same mentality as far as sound. I mean, of course, depending on what is called for, but as far as soundscapes, instrumentation, play to my strengths first before I push outside of those boundaries, when I need to. And, with the production library music stuff compared to scoring, you don't want to change mood mid-track.
Sure.
You want to say this track from start to finish might not be the most exciting journey, but for the duration that you want to use it, it's going to fit your scene. Like if you want for a pensive kind of dark thing, and this starts that way, and then we get to a bridge and I go to a major key and an upbeat backbeat, all of a sudden I change the mood, and that's not going to fit what you're trying to put it to. So with that stuff, you try to stay one palette for a lot of it.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas if you have, what the picture is you're going to put it to, right? Then you have more of a guideline as far as like, oh, this is a happy scene throughout, so I'm going to follow that, and I'm going to try to, like any movie you see, you want that music to kind of, lift up that moment, and like add to it, right? And so it's like, when you're watching a movie and all of a sudden like a character's walking down the hall and you hear the quiet violins come in with a tremolo, you're like, uh-oh,
Right. It's building tension.
Yeah, like, so like I wouldn't do that if it's like a scene where like it's a kid's birthday party.
Right.
So try to like fit what's happening. But yeah, so there's still the jury's out yet. I'll let you know when I find out more. But and I'm just gonna try to play to the strengths that I have and the things that I know that work so far, and start there.
Sure. Are there some like when getting into all these different things? I mean, I think it happens for us as instrumentalists. After a while, you start to understand your own sound. Maybe everybody else already understood it way before us. Right. But we eventually start to understand it ourselves and be like, oh yeah, okay, that's just stuff I do. This is like how I like to play. Yeah. This is how I interpret things when I'm playing. When you're doing these elements of music, writing and creating and producing, have you found already have like kind of your fingerprints come to the surface yet, so to speak?
I think a little bit. It's funny because I was thinking about that not too long ago as I was listening. When those first two library albums came out and people were checking it out and giving me some feedback, and I was listening to them myself, I was noticing certain, through lines that I was like, oh, that's definitely something I'm noticing. I do that.
Okay.
I tend to connect writing to improvising in my mind.
Sure. Okay.
So like when I'm on a gig and I'm taking a solo, I'm not as much thinking about nailing all the changes as I am about finding a motif and creating sort of an arc and finding a melody and creating an arc to it.
Yeah, that's like a storyteller approach versus a bebop approach.
Yeah, that's more of how I improvise. And so I've kind of do that with the writing. And a lot of the times I come up with a chord progression and track it, and then I just start playing over it. And I'll just record and record myself improvising over it. But I'm improvising with that mindset that I'm looking for a melody, I'm looking for a through line.
Yeah.
And then I'll listen back to what I've done, and I'll delete the junk,
Yeah.
And where I'm just noodling, trying to find, oh, wait, I'm in the wrong key. That stuff.
Right.
and then, take the parts that sound like, oh, this could be a cool melody, and play with it and dig in some more, and then retrack it with more of a structure and shape to it.
Sure.
And so that's sort of been my writing process for a lot of this is
okay.
Unless I right away hear something, it's a connected mentality to the way I approach soloing, the way I approach writing. I'm looking for a melody, I'm looking for a motif, I'm looking for a rhythmic phrase. Sometimes I start it with a particular concept, like this is going to be a 6/8 song. I'm going to do that 6/8 guitar strumming thing. That's where it's going to start. And let's see where it goes.
I mean, I think it's, having the jazz background you do, and given the fact that you have worked with so many people and still work with so many people, as a bass player, a lot of times we show up and we take what we're given and then we make lemonade. Like, okay, the drummer plays like this, the harmonic players, like, how do I polish this? So when you have to write and instigate a song from the bass, that's the complete opposite approach. Because now it's not always just like, everybody come to me, this is the thing. Usually we're putting Band-Aids on everybody on the bandstand.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because the Is That You band, some of those tracks started with me coming up with a bass line.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about.
And I was intentionally trying to find something that was like simultaneously melodic and pocket. Like I wanted to have a groove, but I want there to be some melodic direction to this line to kind of push. When I'm doing these albums, these library music albums, a lot of the time the bass is one of the last things I record.
Yeah.
Which is, I never thought that would be how I would do it.
I hear that a lot, actually, that the bass goes on after to like kind of, fill in the gaps after the gaps have already been created.
Yeah. And sometimes if I've done the bass early, I end up redoing it.
Yeah.
And I think some of it might be that I want to hear the song having some shape. Like when you sit down and work with a singer-songwriter who's writing some new material, and they say, "Here's the chart," and you're looking at it, it's like, okay, well, let me hear it first. I want to hear you play through the song first. I don't want to just start playing.
Right. I don't know what I'm playing yet. You know, like what we do is dependent so much on what everybody else is doing. So, that's what was fascinating to me is you starting with just these bass lines. Like that would be harder than showing up and trying to fit into something that's already exists. Like we've honed that skill set where you can be like, okay, this is what I have. Now I can create a melodic bass line given this. But when you're not given, X, creating a melodic bass, well, what the hell? Where do I start?
Yeah. Well, that was the fun thing about that was like, what do I do? And I was like, well, I guess it doesn't matter. I'll just play whatever I hear right now in this moment. Sure. And that was and both of those bass lines were absolutely stream of consciousness. Like I was just jamming, and then I cut out like a good 8-bar or 16-bar phrase that sounded good and sent it off to him. Okay. Make no mistake about it. Like I said, I did it real fast. I was trying to get out the door to a gig. He was like, "This is great, but maybe we could re-record it like more in tune and more in time." I was like, "Well, yeah, I would hope so." That wasn't meant to be the keeper take. That was like, I got to get to this gig, man.
Yeah, this is just a rough pencil sketch on a napkin.
Exactly. Yeah. So so it's like as much as it started with like, here's the idea, it definitely needed to be cleaned up and re-recorded to be, fit for prime time.
Did you put bass on this project for the band? Is that you? Did you put bass on again after? Like, did you start with this initial concept bass line idea that everything was built around, and then you're like, okay, do your thing, send it back to me, and then I'll put bass on again, like final bass last?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what happened. Yeah, because I personally prefer, if we have real drums, or even like programmed drum tracks, I prefer to play to drums.
Yeah.
And so even if I'm playing in time with the click, it's not going to feel the same as it does if I'm hearing a drummer's pocket. I'm going to lean into that. And so, so both of those tunes was like, here's the bass, have at it. And then when it was taking shape, it was like, okay, time to re-record the bass.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, right.
I don't want that going out.
Yeah, I don't want that released in the wild.
Yeah, it's like the idea was good, but the execution wasn't 100%. So yeah, let's do it. And what's great is Tim has been at this for a long time with composing, and he has much more experience than I do with this, to have a really fast ear to catch discrepancies that are going to stick out versus discrepancies that won't matter. And so he's really good at keeping me honest. I was just at his place the other day tracking some new ideas, and I was like, I've got this idea I want to record, and we were putting the bass line down, and he was like, cool, do it again, but don't rush. I'm like, come on, man.
Oh, that little detail?
Like that matters.
Yeah.
But it's great because you have this accountability. You have somebody listening back and saying, and that was something I needed to learn for myself too, because as I'm working on these projects on my own, these library albums where I'm in my little bubble, I have nobody bouncing ideas off of. I started realizing like no one is going to hold me accountable if I don't.
We'll be back right after this.
International Society of Bassists, commonly referred to as ISB, is an amazing resource for double bassists. Visit isbworldoffice.com. They support the double bass community in every way imaginable, from sheet music to finding a teacher to getting insurance on your bass. I'm absolutely honored that they are a sponsor of the Latin Bass Workshop with Oscar Cartaya later this month, and check them out. Check them out, isbworldoffice.com. Get featured on the Bass Shed podcast. That's right here during the middle of the show. You can get your news heard by the bass community and get your links to your social media handles, your websites, whatever your links may be, Bandcamp, whatever you got going on, in the show notes. Stop by thebassshed.com and get your own spot on the Bass Shed podcast. How is this going through all this process and getting deeper in the studio game? How's that affected your live playing?
My live playing?
Yeah, do you play less and think more about the entirety? Not saying that you didn't think like that before, but how is I feel like everything you get into all comes out of the bass on the stage, no matter what, to whatever degree.
Yeah. It absolutely does. I started. It has affected my live playing in the sense that, initially I am now much more conscientious about what tone I'm getting, and what bass I'm gonna bring to the gig, because I want a certain sound or feel for that gig, and then in my playing, being more conscientious about leaving space when I can. For the most part, I think all the things I did before are kind of magnified in my mind.
Okay,
if that makes sense. I'm more aware of the little nuances than I would necessarily have been in the past.
Right, as if you're always soloing tracks in the studio.
Yeah, especially if I've spent the day working on something.
Sure.
Then I get to the gig and I have to try to turn that part of my brain around and focus on performing in the moment.
Right.
But I do find myself hearing like the piano player do something and I'm like, oh, I just want the bass to drop out right now. Actually, all the library music stuff I've been doing right now has all been upright bass.
Okay.
Because they've been acoustic oriented stuff. This new one I'm just about done with. I'm on the last track now. Is an acoustic tension with a southern leaning sound. So kind of like brooding, like think true crime podcast, like this kind of brooding.
Okay.
Vibe.
Like kind of I would probably, again, with like a noir feel, but more with a hillbilly angle.
Noir hillbilly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's my new band.
Is that you? And then the response record is, yes, it is Noir Hillbilly. Yeah.
Yes. That's a great way to say it. It's Noir Hillbilly. I think like, so that stuff's been all acoustic because we want that, the upright bass, the acoustic guitar, the mandolin, those qualities, the banjo, and then some like industrial sounding percussion loops that are building this tension constantly, and some synth soundscapes to kind of balance the hillbilly.
Right. Yeah. I know you just did a tour. Talk about the tour you were just doing.
Yeah. There's a vintage jazz artist named Lizzy Shapiro. She has a group called Lizzy and the Triggermen. So I've been playing with her on and off over the last year or so, and she booked her first tour. It was in the Northeast, or on the East Coast, mostly the Northeast. And went out. It was really 4 main shows, but it was kind of spread out over about 10 days. And luckily, a little break in the middle. I got to spend a little time with family in New York, which is nice. But yeah, it's all upright and it's all like tuxedo, bow tie, vintage jazz stuff.
So vintage jazz, that kind of makes me think it could easily get into like a cabaret-ish feel.
Yeah, it can a little bit. But less gimmicky and more like homage, right? So less
That's good news.
Yeah, less postmodern jukebox and more like actual songs from the 1930s. And she's got a great arranger doing her charts where they really just, the charts are so well written and it gets a lot of sound out of what I call like a reduced big band, like 4 horns, drums, bass, piano, often guitar, and like jazz guitar, like Django Reinhardt vibe.
Yeah.
And fiddle.
So it's like a chamber nonette kind of.
Yeah. But it's definitely that sound and vibe of like that classic 1930s jazz sound.
Gypsy jazz, Stefan
Yeah,
Grappelli.
jazz meets like but vocal, and so Lizzy's a great singer and she's operatically trained.
Okay.
She brings some serious vocal chops to the game as well.
Sick.
And like there's one number that always goes off great where she does a clarinet duet.
Wow.
It's a Sidney Bechet song, but she's the clarinet parts.
Oh, that's cool.
And she really leans into the operatic training and is hitting those high notes with that big sound and vibrato and
just like a vocalese thing where she's not. There's no lyrics to it. She's just singing the
not even
Sidney part.
Yeah, but not even vocalese, just singing the melody.
Oh, okay.
It's like I don't even know what syllable. It's just
yeah. I don't know ever how they pick those
clarinet that it sounds like a duet. I mean, it is
all right.
You know, it doesn't sound like a singer's trying to do this thing. It sounds like it must have been written to be like this. So she's a great singer. It's a cool group, great players, and honestly, I haven't done any touring since before the pandemic, so it was nice to hit the road again for a minute.
Did you were they renting bases for you? Do you have a road base?
I do have a road base, but the travel between cities was such that bringing an instrument was going to be problematic. There wasn't going to be room for it. And what was ironic is in 3 of the 4 cities, by just chance, the bass that ended up being available was a blonde K plywood bass.
Okay.
Which isn't that common.
Yeah.
You know, as far as like there's K basses, but they were all the blonde K plywood.
yeah.
Even funnier about it than that is that was the first upright I played on. Was a blonde K plywood bass. So I was like, this is
okay.
Alternate reality where I'm back on the first bass I played on.
You mentioned you're still working on new material for the group. Is that you? Are you guys going about it the same process now that you have a little bit of traction and you got some things across the finish line?
Yeah.
Are you revamping the process a little bit, or are you sticking with what's been working?
It's similar. The main difference is Tim has relocated to Los Angeles. So when we started, he was in Portland. So it definitely everything was remote. And Dan, the keyboardist, is in Oakland. So everything was just flying tracks back and forth. Now that Tim's here, I've been going over to his place fairly often and just trying out ideas, and I'll just bring whatever bass I feel like bringing that day, and we'll see what we get. Perfect. It's a little more real-time collaborative this time round, where we'll sit down and try some ideas. But again, it is still a similar scenario of collaborating, and he'll send me revisions like, what do you think of this? Check this out. And usually I'm just like, cool.
Yeah.
That was great. Like, run with it. I love it.
So it's Tim, if I remember, let me make sure I get all the personnel in the band correct. Tim is the film guy.
Yeah, he's the guitarist.
He's the guitarist. And which one's the composer?
That's Tim. He's
Tim is the guitar player and composer. Okay. Yeah. And then who's the third guy?
So Dan Berkson is the keyboardist.
Dan Berkson. Okay.
And we'll see. I would love to see Dan contribute some more writing elements because he's got some great stuff going too. We're fortunate on one hand with the technology to live in an age where we all can, if you have access to the equipment, you can have a viable working recording setup in your home and be able to like send pro quality stuff back and forth. And into that end, like I was saying before, when the whole pandemic hit, I had to kind of rethink what I was doing. And I made the decision to invest in some recording equipment and start down that road, which was initially just about recording bass, but went down that rabbit hole, like I said, of writing and recording virtual instruments and the production. Yeah. But from that, I've actually gotten some decent work recording myself as a bass player. I've now played on a few film scores that I literally tracked right here in this room. Where that wasn't when I first moved to LA what I thought would happen.
Yeah. If someone told you were going to be doing that job, you would never have thought this is how it looks. Exactly. Yeah.
Like recording something in my pajamas and then then seeing it on the big screen and like That's funny. I know that scene.
Right.
I remember I was literally in my pajamas. I had, I had
Yeah.
gotten up early to finish this one track, and I didn't even get dressed yet. I was like, let me just do this. So it's a trip.
On the topic of having a home studio, what mic are you using for your acoustic upright?
Oh yeah,
use? Because there's so much information out there. YouTube is flooded with shootouts and this. What mic do you use, and why that mic?
yeah. So, I always record with two mics,
Mm-hmm.
and the main mic that I use as sort of like the foundation, and everything's going to build around this is probably can't see it, but it's in the bridge of the bass, and it's by a company called Remic. All right, here we go.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
And so right in here is the microphone,
I see that now. Yeah.
foam encasement, and you can sit it in the bridge or under the tailpiece or under the fingerboard where it comes over the top of the body.
Okay.
And I had heard an interview on Jason Heath's bass conversation, where he interviewed the mic maker, and he was talking about how he interviewed different luthiers, and that he makes instrument-specific mics. So he has a bass mic, a cello mic. So instead of like, here's a great DPA clip-on mic, no, here's like, this is the bass microphone, and this is the microphone, so on and so forth. And I was so curious from listening to that interview, and I hit them up and got one, and now I'm one of their endorsees, and I use this mic on everything I do with my upright. I've gone to sessions in other people's studios where I've brought this, and I said, just take a signal from this. You don't have to use it if you don't want to.
Yeah.
But nice,
you'll thank me later. Yeah.
They always do. I did one session for a composer where he told me later on that he had this nice mic he put in front of my bass. He messed up something on his preamp that he went through, and he had a wrong setting picked, and he didn't catch it because he was playing while we recorded.
Okay.
And because I brought this, I saved the session because he was able to use this signal. But what's really nice about it, the two things I love about this mic is that it's really transparent. There's no color. It literally sounds exactly like my bass does if you're standing in a room listening to it acoustically. There's no like boomy low end. There's no weird finger noise. It's just super transparent. Right. And because it mounts on the bass, I can move when I'm playing and not worry about whether I'm going to have any signal loss or phase weirdness because I moved off the mic for a moment. It's really nice. I love that mic. I start with that. And then this is a mic. I'm going to turn it away so you can see it.
What do we got here? Okay, I mean, it looks like it's a large diaphragm condenser, right?
Yeah, it's this company called Roswell Pro Audio. And this is they call it their Mini K87. So it's like a U87 clone in a small body.
Right.
And so I love pairing these two mics together because this one gets this does color the sound a little with kind of like a silky sheen to it. So I'll put this and get a little more of the low end with this mic out in front of the bass, and I'll feather that into the Remic. So the Remic is just transparent and focused and clean, and then I'll bring this guy in for a little more color and presence and low end.
Right, and get a little bit more of the air moving from in front of the bass and not just the vibration of the top that the Remic's picking up. Yeah,
and it's nice for catching the low end because I like putting the Remic in the bridge. I feel like it's a nice balance. But it doesn't catch as much as the low end as I would like. It's fine by itself.
What about versus the tailpiece? Like, I'm sure you've experimented with putting it between the fingerboard and the neck, like the upper bouts.
The tailpiece would definitely get more of the low end. For me, I found the sound in the bridge, and this is again on my bass. Your bass will be different,
right? With your strings, your hands, and on its Tuesday at 1:13 p.m. Like it's every
It was much more balanced. And it's funny you say that because like on the Is That You recording, the first track, Butch and Sundance, I think we just got a great bass sound. And
that's a really good bass sound.
I think I had a good day that day with my mic and my gain staging. I had a good day, and it gave the engineer a lot to work with.
That's actually a fascinating topic and something to address, and like your time having to address it might inform folks. Getting consistency from the home recording situation.
That is I have it pretty decently dialed in now, but there are some variables that'll just never change. You might have a day where it's hot or a day where it's cold, and your bass responds to that, right?
Right.
And you get a tighter tone that day. It's not as warm sounding, things like that. But
your action changes, like when the weather shifts, your action changes, and that affects your sound.
The key of the song. If we're in a key where we have open strings, we're gonna have a certain resonance. If I'm playing an A, I'm gonna have some nice resonance in the bass. If I'm playing an A flat, it's gonna feel tighter.
Right. Because all those overtones aren't just popping.
Exactly. So there's elements like that come into play. The two things that I try to do is, one is I try to pay attention to my mic placement. So that's the beautiful thing with that remic. It goes in the same place every time. Right. I'm not worried about that. And I save my settings in my DAW. So I have my bass chain, I have my recording settings, and then I have my mix settings, and I have them saved. So if I'm having a lazy day, at the bare minimum, I can just pull up my presets that I saved, and it's going to get me real close. The consistency thing, like you brought up, is really important, you know?
Right.
And I think especially, like, I've gone to the trouble of when I'm working on something and I know it's going to take me a few days, I'll spike the floor in my room where I have my B15, where I have the mic set so that it will be consistent. If I know, like, I'm going to have to break this down tonight and I got to set it back up tomorrow, like, I'm never going to get it just right. And I
have that for like camera things for when I shoot lessons videos. Like, I have tape on the floor for this is camera 1, that's camera 2. This is where the light goes. I got like tape on the tripod. This is how high it goes. I just want to set it up, and I don't want to do the trial and error thing again. Like, was it here? Was it here? Let me check it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Boom.
In the mistake I made with the consistency issue was that I didn't spike the mic stand on the mic stand. So I was realizing, like, oh man, did I have the mic like here or was it here?
Yeah.
And it might not seem like a big deal, but when you're trying to record an acoustic instrument like the string bass, like it matters.
Yeah.
And you know, that's where I'm like, okay, now on, I'm gonna start putting little tape on every part of the mic stand so I know exactly where it sits. You know.
That's right.
You know, get rid of the guesswork.
Yeah, exactly. But dude, this has been great. Thanks for being on, man.
Oh man, it's awesome. It's so great to see the growth of the bass shed.
It's been growing. There's a lot going on with it.
I just listened to your Rickles interview the other day.
Oh, cool.
I love Dark.
Yeah.
I did my master's at SC, so I had lessons with Dark, and they were great.
Okay.
He's just a like you hear in that interview, he's just a straight shooter. Like, he's like, this is how I do the thing I do. Other people do this. I'm not interested. I do my thing. And I love him for that. And
he's on the road. I mean, he's played with all my favorite people. You know, like, the only question I wanted to really ask is, like, dude, how do I get the gigs you're on? Like, I want all the gigs you do. You're going to play with Mancini in an orchestra? Yeah, I want that one.
Yeah.
You're wherever. I think he's in Poland right now with Meldal. Like, yeah, I want on that one.
Yeah, right.
You know, like, everything you're doing, I want on.
I hope there'll be recordings to hear that, because I don't think Meldal and Jorge Rossi have played together in a long time.
Since the original trio? Yeah, I don't know, actually. I haven't really been following that. I don't know
either, but most of his trio stuff in the last, like, decade.
Jeff Ballard.
Yeah. So seeing that was Meldal and Jorge Rossi and Darek, yes, please.
The band is titled Is That You? The EP is titled Split 5 Ways. It's on all the streaming platforms, correct?
More platforms than I knew existed. Yeah, it's out there. I've seen people checking it out on YouTube Music, on Amazon Music. Oh, cool. I know it's on Spotify and Apple Music.
Does YouTube have their own music thing now?
Yeah, they do.
Really?
There's some people that subscribe, like you do for the other streaming services, for YouTube Music, separate from the YouTube itself.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. There's too many things. Like, I don't even know.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So,
1, I don't know where to put stuff. 2, I don't know where to go to check out other people's stuff.
Yeah. Well, you know what's kind of cool is when you do a release like this, because I have something of my own that's just my own that I'm looking to do in the next release in the next year.
Sweet.
And now I've learned about this through this project, that there's a couple companies. We use one called DistroKid, and what's great is that they take care of all of that. You upload your content, you set some of the parameters, like I want this release date, so on and so forth. and then they do the rest. They push it, and then they let you know when it's on deck at these different streaming platforms, ready to go. And it's like, great.
Yeah.
Great. It makes it a lot, because I was like, where do you even begin? Do I have to hunt down? No, there's the distributor that does it for you. You just pay them to do the dirty work.
Right.
And I'm glad I've kind of learned the process. Because I grew out of the pandemic project experiences. I have a bunch of bass vignettes I recorded that I'm gonna put out there once I'm done cleaning them up.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, it was improvisational based concept. A little bit listening to Darik's interview, I was kind of chuckling because I did a similar thing, but
okay.
But more where I just sat. It's half electric, half upright. Where I just sat down and played stream of consciousness, came out some ideas, and then picked the best part of it, isolated that, and then built around it. And and my only rule I set with myself is that the only instrument I can use is a bass.
Yeah.
Anything else you hear, any percussion, anything, it's me playing on the bass. Everything is bass.
Okay.
So so that's an interesting thing. So I'm looking to finish that up. It's one of those things that it's like when I have time, I go back and do a little mixing and editing, and there's not a lot to mix. It's not too much to it, and it's more of like I just need to say to myself, okay, here's your end date, be done with it.
Right. Right.
Because the longer you sit on something, the more you revisit and think, well, I could redo that. And
Or when there's no end date, it's like, okay, I'll get to it. I'll get to it Thursday, and then it's Saturday, and you're like, oh, damn it. Okay, this Thursday. Yeah, I got the same hole in the schedule I'll get to, and it just, you never really do. Well intended, but life happens.
The spirit of the idea was for it to be based in the moment, improvisation, compositional improvisation, right? And then move on.
Right.
Some are more sparse than others, some are shorter, some are longer, but that was the whole idea. And so to go back and redo anything would kind of go against the whole concept of
it. Sure.
Like, it's supposed to be like warts and all. Like some of it, is not going to be perfect, but that's kind of the idea.
Yeah, that's part of it.
Yeah. So I'm glad through this experience I've learned a little bit more about doing a self-release when you're on your own and how this works. And like I said earlier, in this age of like technology, we can do that.
Yeah. Cool, man.
Go in a studio,
dude.
Can happen.
Thanks for being on. Let me know when that's out. I want to not only hear it, but have you back on to talk about it.
Absolutely, man. Thanks. This is great.
Cool, dude. It's been fantastic. All right, dude. We'll talk soon.
All right, brother.
All right. Thanks, Gary. Peace.
Later.
Yo, this is Craig Gash. Subscribe to the podcast. Follow us on the Instagram, the YouTube. Leave us a comment.
All right. That was my talk with Gary Wicks. Again, the group is called Is That You, and the EP is titled Split 5 Ways. There is a link in the show notes below, and you should all go listen to that. And when I say that, I mean like right now. Like you should all go listen to the EP right now. Like I'm signing off so you can go listen to it. All right, that's it, folks. I will catch you on the next one in a minute.